Jake sat at his small desk in the cramped apartment, staring at the glowing screen of his laptop. The soft hum of the old computer was the only sound filling the quiet room. It had been one of those days. Nothing seemed to go right. His job. At the local grocery store, barely paid enough to cover rent, and every attempt at finding something better ended in rejection. He had no money, no prospects, and no idea how he was going to get out of this rut. He sighed, scrolling through the endless list of items for sale online. Most were overpriced junk that no one needed, but something caught his eye. It was a spaceship listed for $10. His eyes widened in disbelief. Surely this had to be a joke. A spaceship for $10. It had to be some kind of scam, right? Jake clicked on the link, half expecting the page to disappear or the seller to be some shady character asking for his bank details. But the page remained. The ad was simple. It's just a few lines of text. For sale. Spaceship needs some work, but it's functional. $1.10 must pick up. Call 555-0102. He rubbed his eyes, thinking he must be seeing things. Spaceships were worth millions, sometimes billions, not $10. And yet here it was, right in front of him. He was curious, but also cautious. There had to be a catch. Jake leaned back in his chair, staring at the phone number on the screen. He thought about it for a moment before making a decision. Maybe it was a scam, but he had nothing to lose. Besides, if it was real, it would be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He clicked the number to dial. It rang for a few seconds before someone picked up. Hello? A gruff voice answered, sounding uninterested. Hi, Jake began, unsure of how to phrase his question. I saw your ad for the spaceship. Is it really only $10? There was a pause on the other end. Yep, the man replied shortly. It's real. You want it or not? Jake couldn't believe his ears. Yeah, sure. But what's the catch? Why is it so cheap? The man sighed. It's a fixer-upper. It's been sitting in the yard for years, and I don't have the time or money to fix it. If you're serious, I can give you the address. Just come pick it up. First come, first served. Jake hesitated. This felt too good to be true, but it was a spaceship. A real spaceship. He had no idea what he was getting into, but something told him he had to go. Okay, he said finally. I'll come by tomorrow, thanks. He hung up, still unsure whether this was the beginning of a great adventure or a huge mistake. The next day, Jake found himself standing outside a run-down house on the outskirts of town. The yard was filled with piles of junk, and in the middle of it all was an old, battered spaceship. It looked like it had been through a lot. The metal was dented, the paint was chipped, and some parts were covered in rust. It didn't look like anything close to the sleek, shiny ships he had seen in movies or on TV, but it was a spaceship, and it was his for $10. Jake walked closer, his curiosity growing by the second. He looked around but saw no one in sight. The place seemed abandoned, like the owner had left long ago and never returned. He called the number again, but no one answered. He figured it was probably the last chance he would ever have to own something like this, so he didn't want to waste time. He walked up to the ship and began inspecting it. There were a few odd-looking buttons and levers inside, but nothing he could recognize. The cockpit looked like it hadn't been touched in years, but there were signs of life. Small glowing lights flickered on and off around the control panel, as if the ship was still alive. Jake knew he wasn't an expert in spacecraft, but he figured he could at least try to get it working. He had spent hours watching videos online about space exploration and repairs, so he had a basic understanding of how things should work. Maybe he could fix it. Maybe he could even sell it for a profit. He stood there for a few more minutes, unsure of what to do next. This ship was supposed to be his, but he felt a little out of place, standing there alone in front of such a strange and intimidating object. As he was about to leave, a voice suddenly interrupted his thoughts. You're not planning on taking it without paying, are you? Spun around, startled. A woman was standing near the edge of the yard, watching him with a curious expression. She was tall and thin, with dark hair and a serious look in her eyes. I'm just looking, Jake stammered, feeling embarrassed. I don't know if I can actually take it. Is it really for sale? The woman nodded, stepping closer. Yes, but you need to be careful with it. It's not just some junk. That ship, it's more than you think. Jake's heart skipped. A beat more than he thought? What did she mean? Who was this woman? He had no idea, but for some reason, he knew that this encounter was going to change his life forever. She stared at him for a moment, before speaking again. You'd better figure out how to get it working. You'll need it sooner than you think. Jake's head was spinning. This was no ordinary spaceship, and this was no ordinary deal. But he had already made the choice. The ship was his now, and there was no turning back. The real adventure was just beginning. Jake stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. To the mysterious woman, she had appeared out of nowhere and seemed to know more about the spaceship than she was letting on. His mind was racing with questions, but before he could ask her anything, she turned and started walking toward the ship. I might want to follow me, she said without looking back. If you're serious about taking this ship, you'll need to know a few things. Jake was taken aback, but he couldn't help himself. He'd already come this far, and now, with someone guiding him, maybe he could figure out what was going on. He followed her cautiously, still trying to make sense of the situation. As they reached the ship, she stopped and turned to face him. It's not just any ship, she said. It's a very old model, but it's more advanced than you think. Squinted at her, unsure if he should be excited or worried. What do you mean? It looks like it's falling apart. The woman smirked. That's because it's been abandoned for a long time. It's been through battles and wars, but it still holds secrets. You can't just jump in and expect it to work like a regular spaceship. You need to understand its history, and you need to know how to activate its systems. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just an old spaceship, it was something special. But he still didn't fully understand why the woman was so serious about it. What's so important about this ship? He asked. The woman hesitated for a moment before answering. This ship used to belong to a faction of explorers. They traveled far across the galaxy, discovering new worlds and advanced technology. There was a war. The faction lost and the ship was abandoned.
Ow.
But it's still a part of something much bigger. If you learn to control it, you could become a key player in something far more important than you realize.
Ow.
Jake's mind was spinning. He had bought a spaceship for $10, and now it seemed like he was being dragged into some kind of galactic conflict. He felt out of his depth, but curiosity got the best of him. How do I start? The woman raised an eyebrow and pointed to the ship's control panel. First, we need to see if the ship's main systems are still functional. If they are, we can start the repair process. Jake nodded, still unsure of what to do next. He stepped forward and took a closer look at the control panel. It was a mess of wires, glowing buttons, and strange symbols he didn't recognize. He wasn't an expert in spaceships, but he had seen enough sci-fi movies to know the basics. He reached out and touched one of the buttons, and to his surprise, the panel lit up with a soft hum. The woman stepped forward and pointed to another button. Press that one. It'll open the ship's main systems. But be careful. It's not like any ship you've seen before. Jake pressed the button, and the ship seemed to come alive. The whole room lit up with soft blue lights and strange sounds. Echoed through the hole, Jake stepped back in surprise, but the woman seemed unfazed. It's responding, she said with a hint of approval. That's a good sign. Jake couldn't believe it. The ship was actually working. He had expected to buy a junker, something barely functional at best. But this was something else. He could feel the power inside, as if the ship had its own life force. What happens now? Jake asked, still in awe. We need to assess the damage, the woman replied. There's a lot of hidden tech inside this ship, and most of it is in need of repair. But we don't have the luxury of time. People are already looking for it. Jake felt a knot in his stomach. Who's looking for it? Why? The woman looked him in the eye, her expression serious. The faction I told you about, they want it back. And there are others who would stop at nothing to get their hands on it. But we have a head start. We can fix it, and we can make it our own. But we need to move quickly. Jake wasn't sure if he should feel excited or scared. He had just bought a spaceship for $10, but now it seemed like he was in over his head. He glanced at the woman again, trying to make sense of what she was telling him. How do you know all this? He asked. I used to be part of that faction, she said quietly, but I left. Now I'm trying to stop them from taking the ship and using it for their own purposes. If they get their hands on it, there's no telling what they'll do. Jake didn't know what to say. He had never been involved in anything like this. One minute he was struggling to pay his rent, and the next he was sitting in the cockpit of a mysterious spaceship with a stranger who seemed to know more about it than he did. The woman turned and motioned for him to follow her again. We need to start working on this. The longer we wait, the closer they get. Jake took a deep breath and followed her. He had no idea what he was getting into, but something told him that. This spaceship was just the beginning of an adventure that would change his life forever. The galaxy, he was beginning to realize, was far bigger and more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. Jake stood inside the dimly lit cockpit of the spaceship, staring at the complex control panel in front of him. The ship hummed softly, its lights blinking on and off like it was still alive, waiting for him to understand its secrets. He had only pressed a few buttons, yet the ship was already responding, its system slowly coming back to life. But something still didn't sit right with him. The woman, who had introduced herself as Zara, was acting like she knew more than she was letting on. Why are you so sure about this ship? Jake finally asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. What's really going on here? Zara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked to one side of the cockpit, where a small panel was covered in dust. She wiped it clean and began inspecting the controls. Her movements were quick and confident, as if she had done this many times before. She paused for a moment and then turned to Jake, her expression serious. This ship isn't just any old spacecraft. It belonged to a group of explorers, a powerful faction that was once one of the most advanced in the galaxy. They discovered new worlds, unlocked incredible technology, and traveled to places no one else could reach. But that all changed when they were betrayed. Jake watched her carefully, trying to absorb everything she was saying. So, what happened to them, and why did you leave? Zara looked down for a moment, her face softening. The faction was destroyed. They were betrayed by their own people leaders who wanted more power. The ship was abandoned, but its technology is still too dangerous. I left because I knew it was only a matter of time before someone else came looking for it. And now, they have. The faction's enemies are still out there, and they will stop at nothing to get what they want. Jake's stomach tightened. Wasn't just some random ship. This was something far more important than he had realized. It wasn't just a deal that he had stumbled upon. It was a key to something bigger. So, they want the ship back? Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. But why me? What? Why would they come after me? Zara stepped closer, her eyes locking. With his, they know the ship is back in circulation, and they know it's the only one of its kind. You may have just bought it for $10, but you're now a target. Well, if they find you, they won't hesitate to take it to you by force. Felt a chill run down his spine. He had thought this would be an exciting adventure, a way to escape his dull life. But now it seemed like he had unknowingly stepped into a dangerous game. He had no experience with space travel, no idea how to use the advanced technology in front of him, and now he was being hunted. What should I do? Jake asked, his voice filled with panic. I didn't sign up for any of this, Zara sighed, her expression softening as she placed a hand on his shoulder. Oh, you don't have a choice. You have something that they want, and they won't stop until they get it. The best thing you can do right now is learn how to control this ship and fast. Jake looked at her, trying to understand. But I don't know how to fly this thing. I'm not some expert. I barely know anything about spaceships. Zara gave him a small, reassuring smile. That's why I'm here. I'll teach you. We don't have much time, but I'll show you how to operate the basic systems. Once we're on the move, we'll figure out how to stay one step ahead of them. Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him. Zara seemed to know what she was doing, and maybe, just maybe, she was his best chance at surviving whatever was coming next. All right, Jake said, his voice steadier now. Let's do it. Zara nodded and motioned for him to follow her to the main control panel. First, let's see if the navigation system is still working, she said, her voice calm and focused. This ship has a built-in hyperdrive, but it's different from anything you've seen. You'll need to know how to activate it if we're going to escape before they catch up. Jake stepped up to the panel and watched as Zara began pushing buttons and flipping switches. Ship hummed again, louder this time as the navigation system flickered to life. The display showed star maps and coordinates, and Jake felt a surge of excitement. This was it. He was actually inside a real spaceship. But Zara's expression remained serious. We'll need to make some repairs first. The ship's engines are old, and some of the systems are unstable. We can't jump to hyperspace just yet. Jake nodded, trying to keep up. What do I need to do? Zara pointed to a small compartment near the control panel. There's a toolkit inside. Grab it and we'll start working on the engines. We don't have much time, and if they're tracking us already, we'll need the ship to be in top condition. Quickly grabbed the kit and followed Zara to a hatch that led to the lower part of the ship. The engine room was cramped, filled with cables and blinking lights. It was clear that the ship had been through a lot, and the repairs would take time. As they worked, Zara kept explaining the basics of how the ship worked, teaching Jake what he needed to know. Once the ship is operational, we'll need to find a safe place to lay low, Zara said, her voice steady as she worked. We can't just stay here. The longer we wait, the more dangerous it becomes. Jake didn't like the sound of that, but he couldn't ignore the reality of the situation. They were being hunted, and the only way to survive was to get the ship into shape and escape before it was too late. He looked at Zara, his mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. What happens if we can't fix it in time? Zara's expression hardened. Then we run. We keep running until we figure out how to fight back. Jake knew she was right. There was no turning back now. They were in this together, and the fate of the ship and maybe even their lives depended on how fast they could get it working. He just hoped they weren't too late. The ship hummed as Jake and Zara worked tirelessly to repair the damaged engines. Every minute counted, and the urgency in Zara's voice pushed Jake to move faster than he had ever moved before. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he twisted wires and connected circuits, all while Zara kept watch on the control panel, monitoring their progress. I think we're almost there, Zara said, her voice tight with concentration.
Always.
Once these systems are stable, we can start the ship and get out of here. Jake wiped his hands on his shirt and took a deep breath. He was starting to get the hang of it, but he still felt like an outsider. This was all new to him, spaceships, alien technology, and now a dangerous chase across the stars. The last few days had completely changed his life, and he didn't know what to expect next, just as he was about to ask Zara about their next move. A loud beep came from the control panel. Zara's eyes flicked to the screen, and her face went pale. They found us, she said, her voice sharp. They're already on our trail. We need to move, now. Jake's heart raced. Who was coming for them? And how did they find them so quickly? Zara's calm demeanor only made him more nervous, but he could tell she wasn't one to panic. How do we escape? Jake asked, his voice shaky. Zara turned to him, her expression hardening. We don't have much time. The ship's systems are almost ready, but we need to engage the hyperdrive. If we're lucky, we can jump to a nearby system before they catch up. Jake nodded, his mind trying to process everything. He had no idea what a hyperdrive was or how it worked, but he knew it was their only chance. He quickly returned to the cockpit, where the ship's controls were lit up, waiting for action. Zara followed closely behind him. You see the large red button? Zara asked, her eyes scanning the console. Jake nodded. Yeah. What does it do? It activates the hyperdrive, Zara replied. But you need to enter the correct coordinates first. If we don't, we'll end up in the middle of nowhere. You need to follow my instructions carefully. Jake's hand shook as he typed the coordinates Zara gave him into the system. He could feel the ship vibrating beneath him, as if it, too, was aware of the danger they were in. The tension in the air was thick, and Jake couldn't help but glance over his shoulder, as if expecting the enemies to burst through the walls at any moment. Once the coordinates were set, Zara gave him a nod. Hit the button. With a deep breath, Jake slammed his hand down on the red button. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, with a loud whoosh, the ship lurched forward. The stars outside the windows stretched into bright streaks of light. Jake's stomach dropped as the ship shot through space faster than he could comprehend. Zara smiled. But it was a strained, worried smile. "We're safe for now, but we won't be for long." Jake blinked, still trying to process what had just happened. He had just activated a hyperdrive technology he didn't even understand, and they were now racing through space at an unimaginable speed. It felt like they had left their pursuers far behind, but Zara's expression told him otherwise. "Are we stopping?" Jake asked, looking at the controls. "We're not being chased anymore, right?" Zara shook her head. "We're just getting started. The hyperdrive bought us time, but we won't stay hidden forever. The people chasing us won't. Stop until they have the ship, and they have more resources than we do." H over him. The excitement of escaping had quickly faded, replaced by the harsh reality of their situation. They weren't out of danger, not by a long shot. He glanced out the window, watching the stars blur as they sped through the galaxy. "It's our next move?" Jake asked. Zara thought for a moment, her eyes narrowing in thought. "We need to lay low for a while. There's a remote system nearby, a place they won't expect us to hide. It's uncharted and has no value to anyone looking for the ship. We can rest there and regroup." Jake didn't question her. He had learned by now that Zara knew more about all this than he ever would. "How long until we get there?" "Just a few hours," she said. "But we need to stay alert. We don't know if they've already tracked us to this system. We can't afford to make any mistakes." Jake settled into the seat, his mind still racing. He had gone from a guy living a normal, boring life to a fugitive on the run, with a spaceship he didn't understand and enemies he didn't know how to fight. It was all happening so fast. "How did you get involved in all of this?" Jake asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. "What's your connection to the faction? You said you used to be a part of them." Zara's face tightened as she looked. Out the window, her eyes distant. "I was one of their top engineers. I helped design and build ships like this one. But when the faction fell apart, I couldn't stay. I knew what they were becoming, and I couldn't be a part of that anymore. So I left. Now I'm trying to stop them from using this ship for their own gain." Jake listened carefully. Zara had a past that was much darker than he had realized, and now she was trusting him to help her stop a powerful enemy. He didn't know if he was ready for all of this, but he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't turn back. The ship continued its journey through the stars. The hum of the engines, the only sound in the cockpit. It was hard for Jake to believe how much his life had changed in such a short time. But with Zara by his side, maybe, just maybe, they could stay one step ahead of their enemies and find a way to make it through. The ship sailed quietly through the vast expanse of space, its engines humming softly as it followed the uncharted path Zara had set for them. Jake sat in the cockpit, eyes fixed on the stars outside, but his mind was far from calm. The peacefulness of space didn't match the whirlwind of thoughts racing through his head. They had escaped for now, but the chase wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Zara was seated beside him, her hands resting lightly on the controls as she watched the display screens. She had been unusually quiet since they had left the last system, her focus intense. Jake knew she was thinking about their next move, but he couldn't help but wonder if she was still worried about their pursuers. "How long until we reach the system?" Jake asked, breaking the silence. Zara glanced at the screen. "A few more hours? We'll need to be careful when we get there. It's a hidden place, but there are still ships that pass through. We can't afford to be seen." Jake nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure how they would avoid detection. The ship might be fast, but he still had no real understanding of how it worked. Zara had been teaching him little by little, but there was so much he didn't know. How could he help when he didn't even understand the full potential of the ship? As if reading his mind, Zara turned to him. "You're doing fine," she said, her voice calm. "I know this isn't easy, but you're adapting faster than I expected." Jake wasn't so sure. He had no experience with spaceships or alien technology. And now, he was flying one that could mean the difference between life and death. "I just don't want to screw this up," he said, his voice tight with the pressure he was feeling. Zara's eyes softened as she looked at him. "You won't. I'm here to help, but you need to trust yourself. This ship is more than just metal and wires. It's a tool land. You're learning how to use it. Jake didn't respond right away. The weight of their situation hung heavily on his shoulders. They weren't just running from enemies anymore. They were becoming part of something bigger, something he didn't fully understand. He didn't know what they were up against, but the more Zara spoke about the faction and their enemies, the more he realized how dangerous it all was. Just then, a soft beep interrupted his thoughts. Zara immediately turned to the control panel and frowned. "We're not alone," she muttered under her breath. "Someone's following us." Jake's heart skipped a beat. "How can you tell?" Zara's fingers flew over the controls, bringing up a map of nearby systems. She zoomed in on a cluster of stars ahead. "There's a ship trailing us. Small, but it's moving fast. They've been tracking us for a while." "Are they from the faction?" Jake asked, his voice rising with anxiety. Zara's lips tightened into a thin line. "I can't say for sure. But whoever they are, they're close. We need to change course." She quickly adjusted the ship's trajectory, and the stars outside shifted, becoming a blur as the ship veered off its path. Jake gripped the armrest, watching as the ship began to speed up. He didn't know how Zara could make these decisions so quickly, but it was clear she was a lot more experienced than he was. "Are we going to outrun them?" Jake asked, trying to calm himself. "We'll try," Zara said. "But we can't keep running forever. Eventually they'll catch up. We need a place to hide, and fast." Jake didn't have an answer. He wasn't sure how much longer they could keep this up, but he had no choice but to trust Zara. She had been right about so many things already, and he knew she was doing everything she could to protect them both. As the ship's engines roared, the blinking lights of the controls grew brighter, casting an eerie glow over Zara's face. "There's a place ahead," she said, her voice steady. "A small rebel hideout. It's the only place I can think of where we might be able to lose them." "Rebels?" Jake asked, his eyebrows furrowing. "What do they have to do with all this?" "They're fighting against the faction's enemies," Zara explained. "They've been trying to stop them from taking over more systems. We've worked with them before, but it's been a long time. I don't know if they'll help us, but we don't have many options left." Jake nodded. He didn't care who they were as long as they could keep him alive. "How do we get there?" Zara tapped a few buttons, bringing up the coordinates. "It's a small hidden base. We can land there and hide until we figure out our next move. It's risky, but it's the only chance we've got." As the ship flew toward the hidden rebel base, Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. He had no idea what they were walking into, or who would be waiting for them when they arrived. But one thing was clear: Sarah wasn't just running from the faction's enemies. She was determined to stop them, no matter what it took. "What if they don't help us?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zara's gaze was hard as she looked at him. "Then we'll keep fighting on our own. But I'm not giving up, and neither should you." Jake felt the weight of her words, and for the first time he realized how much this was costing her. She wasn't just a pilot, a stranger he had met on the run. She was someone who had risked everything to escape a past she could never forget. And now, she was dragging him into a battle he didn't fully understand. As the ship neared the rebel base, Jake tightened his grip on the controls. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing: this was far from over. They were about to face their enemies head-on, and no matter how uncertain he felt, he was ready to fight alongside Zara. The stars outside the windows blurred as Jake and Zara made their way toward the rebel hideout. The ship hummed steadily, the engines purring in the background. But Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Every minute they spent in space brought them closer to their enemies, and he didn't know how much longer. Zara's plan would work. "How much longer?" Jake asked, his voice tense as he watched the display screen showing their position. "We're almost there," Zara replied, her hands steady on the controls. "But we need to be cautious. The base is hidden, and the last thing we want is to be spotted before we land." Jake nodded, feeling the weight of their situation pressing down on him. He had gone from being an ordinary guy to running for his life in a stolen spaceship. Now, they were about to land at a rebel hideout, hoping they could get the help they needed. "What happens when we get there?" Jake asked, trying to calm the growing anxiety in his chest. "We'll land, and I'll try to contact the rebels, Zara explained. They might not be thrilled to see me, but we don't have many options left. We'll need their help to stay hidden until we figure out how to fight back. Jake's stomach turned at the thought. He had never been part of a fight like this, never had to face powerful enemies or decide who to trust. The people they were up against had resources, and Jake wasn't sure how they could defeat them. He had no experience in battles, no weapons, and no idea what he was doing. All he had was the ship, and even that felt like it was beyond his control. "Do you think they'll help us?" Jake asked, his voice quiet. Zara glanced at him, her face softening for a moment. "I don't know, but we have to try. All the rebels have been fighting the same enemies we are, and if we don't work together, we'll never make it out of this." The thought of joining forces with strangers made Jake uneasy, but he didn't have a choice. Zara was right. They needed allies, and the rebels were their best chance. Still, something about the situation felt fragile. The rebels might not welcome them with open arms. In fact, they might turn them away, especially if they learned Zara's history with the faction. As they neared the rebel base, Zara's voice cut through Jake's thoughts. "We're going to land now. Stay quiet and follow my lead." Jake nodded, his nerves on edge. The ship began its descent, and the world outside grew larger as they approached the hidden base. Jake watched as the stars outside the windows became more visible, the darkness of space giving way to the rocky landscape of a distant planet. Zara expertly guided the ship down, and soon they were hovering just above the ground. Jake could see a small structure nestled among the rocks, a place that seemed almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. "We're here," Zara said, her voice low. "Stay close, and don't make any sudden moves." The ship touched down gently, and the engines powered down. Silence filled the cockpit. Jake's heart raced as he followed Zara to the exit. The door opened with a hiss, and the cool air of the alien planet rushed in. Zara stepped out first, her eyes scanning the area for any signs of danger. Jake followed closely behind, trying to stay as quiet as possible. "Keep your head down," Zara whispered, her eyes flicking toward the distant structure. "We don't know who's waiting for us." The two of them moved quickly toward the rebel hideout, keeping to the shadows. The rocky terrain made it hard to see far ahead, and the air was thick with tension. Jake's mind raced with thoughts of what might happen next. Would the rebels help them? Or would they turn them away, thinking they were just another pair of fugitives looking for refuge? Reached the entrance of the hideout, a small door built into the rock face. Zara knocked twice, a soft, rhythmic pattern. There was a pause, and then the door creaked open. A figure appeared in the doorway, cloaked in shadows. Zara stepped forward. "It's me," she said quietly. "I need to speak with the leader." The figure hesitated for a moment before stepping aside, allowing them to enter. Jake followed Zara into the dimly lit interior, his senses alert. Inside, the hideout was small but functional, with a few rebel soldiers milling about and equipment scattered. Across the room, the walls were lined with old maps and communication devices, and there was an air of quiet determination among the people inside. "Zara," a voice called from the back of the room. A man emerged from the shadows, his face weathered and serious. "I didn't expect to see you again." Zara met his gaze without flinching. "I didn't expect to be back either." The man studied them both for a moment, his eyes narrowing. "You know the rules? We don't take in just anyone." "Zara's." The voice was firm. "I'm not here for shelter. I'm here because we have a problem. And if we don't work together, none of us will survive." The man hesitated, but then nodded. "All right, you've got my attention. What's going on?" Zara quickly explained their situation. The ship, the enemies, and the danger they were facing. The man listened carefully, his expression growing more serious with each word. "All right," he said finally. "You can stay for now. But you'll need to prove you're not a threat. We have enough problems without taking on more." Zara nodded, her eyes hardening. "We'll do whatever it takes." Jake stood silently by her side, trying to process everything that had just happened. They had found allies, but the real fight was just beginning. The rebels might have agreed to help them, but there was still so much they didn't know. Who could they trust? Would they be able to stop the enemies in time? Zara glanced at him, her eyes filled with determination. This isn't over, Jake. Not by a long shot. We've just begun. Jake nodded, his own resolve growing. This was the first time he truly understood the weight of the battle ahead, and for the first time he felt ready to fight. The rebel base was quiet, but the air inside was thick with tension. Jake could feel the weight of their situation pressing down on him as he sat in a small, dimly lit room. Zara stood beside him, her face hard as she spoke to the rebel leader about their next move. They had made it this far, but Jake knew that this was just the beginning. The real challenge was still ahead of them. The rebel leader, a man named Rick, was sitting at a table, staring at a map of the galaxy. "We don't have much time," he said, his voice gruff. "If what you're saying is true, then the faction's forces will be closing in on us soon. We need a plan, and we need it fast." Zara nodded, her eyes focused. "I know, but we don't have the luxury of time. We need to get the ship ready to fight back. It's the only advantage we have." Jake sat quietly, listening to the conversation but not fully understanding all the details. He had only just begun to learn about the ship's power, and now they were talking about using it as a weapon. He wasn't sure if he was ready for that kind of responsibility. The stakes were higher than ever, and he was beginning to feel the weight of it all. Rick looked up at Zara. "You're asking a lot from us. We've been fighting for years, but we don't have the resources to take on an entire faction. If we're going to do this, we need to know that the ship is worth the risk." Zara turned to Jake, her eyes softening. "For a moment, we've come this far, Jake. It's our best shot. But we need you to trust the ship, to believe that it can do what we need it to do." Jake took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "I trust you," he said, his voice steady, but uncertain. "But I still don't fully understand how this ship works. I've only scratched the surface." Zara nodded. "That's okay. We're in this together, and we'll figure it out as we go. The ship isn't just a tool, it's a weapon. It's our key to winning this fight." The room was silent for a moment as everyone processed what Zara had said. The rebel soldiers exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to expect. The thought of using the ship's power to fight back was both exciting and terrifying. Rick stood up, his expression hardening. "All right, we'll help you, but we need a plan. Can't just go in blind," Zara agreed. "We need to hit them where it hurts, take out their command center, and cut off their ability to organize. If we can do that, we can cripple their forces." Jake could see the fire in Zara's eyes, the determination to see this through to the end. She wasn't just fighting for survival. She was fighting for something bigger, something that could change the fate of the entire galaxy. Rick nodded slowly. "We'll need to move fast. We'll gather what supplies we can, but we don't have much time. They're probably already on to us." Zara turned to Jake, her face softening again. "You're going to have to pilot the ship. I'll guide you through it, but you need to be ready." Jake's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure if he was ready for that kind of responsibility. But as he looked around the room, at the faces of the rebels who were depending on him, he knew there was no turning back. "I'm ready," Jake said, his voice firm. Zara gave him a reassuring smile, then turned back to Rick. "We'll need a distraction, something to draw their attention away while we make our move." Rick thought for a moment. "We can create a diversion. We have a few small ships that can cause some chaos and give you the cover you need." "Good," Zara said. "We'll use that to our advantage." The plan was simple, but dangerous. The rebels would create a diversion to draw the enemy's attention, allowing Jake and Zara to sneak into the heart of the faction's stronghold. There they would disable their communications and take out key targets, hoping to cripple their command structure. Jake didn't fully understand the details, but he didn't need to. He just needed to trust Zara, trust the ship, and do his part. They spent the next few hours preparing for the mission. The rebels gathered their gear and made final checks on their own ships, while Zara showed Jake the basic controls of the spaceship. Once again, he was starting to get the hang of it, but the thought of flying into enemy territory was still daunting. "Stay focused," Zara said as she stood beside him, guiding his hands over the controls. "The ship responds to you. It's more than just a machine. You have to feel it. Dada. Jake nodded, trying to concentrate on her words. He had no choice but to believe in the ship, to trust that it could do what Zara said it could do. Finally, everything was ready. The rebels were in position, and it was time to move out. Zara and Jake boarded the ship, and the engines powered up with a low rumble. As the ship lifted off, Jake felt a surge of adrenaline. This was at the moment they had been waiting for. The ship shot into the sky, and Jake could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He glanced over at Zara, who was sitting calmly beside him, her eyes focused on the stars ahead. She was ready. She had always been ready. They were heading into enemy territory, and Jake wasn't sure if they would make it out alive. But one thing was clear. They were in this together, and they would fight until the end.